It was an old apartment block that had been sealed off for years due to a major fire. The fire had been so intense that the entire block had to be evacuated, and the government had deemed it too dangerous for anyone to enter. However, some adventurous teenagers had found a way in, and soon word had spread about the haunted block. I have always been fascinated by abandoned places, and the sealed-off apartment block had intrigued me since I had first heard about it. I had spent hours researching the block and the history of the fire, and my curiosity had gotten the better of me. I wanted to explore the block and see for myself what lay inside. Despite warnings from friends and family, I had decided to take the risk and enter the block. Little did I know, this decision would lead to a nightmare beyond my wildest imagination. As soon as I entered the block, I could feel the eerie atmosphere surrounding me. The air was thick with dust and the smell of smoke, and the silence was deafening. The only sound was the soft thud of my footsteps on the concrete floor as I made my way through the dark and dingy corridors. As I climbed up the stairs, I suddenly realized that they led to nowhere. I stopped in my tracks, wondering how anyone could have lived in such an odd place. I turned around to leave, but then noticed an unlocked door a few feet away. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously stepped inside. The room was empty except for a strange noise that seemed to be coming from within the apartment. I tried to locate the source of the noise, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. I then noticed a vanishing clip on the ground, and a dirty, ragged doll lying nearby. Something seemed off about them, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Suddenly, I heard a shrieking scream coming from one of the nearby rooms. I ran to investigate, but as soon as I arrived, the scream stopped. I found a drawing on the wall that seemed to depict a girl wandering aimlessly through the halls. As I turned around, I came face to face with a figure holding a knife and an axe. I froze in terror, unsure of what to do next. The figure just stood there, staring at me with hollow eyes, before disappearing into thin air. I tried to make my way back down the stairs, but they seemed to have disappeared. I was trapped, with no way out. Then, I noticed something dripping from the ceiling. At first, I thought it was just water, but soon realized it was blood. I heard the sound of bones cracking, and I realized that the pool beneath the block was filled with human bones. I frantically tried to escape, but every door I opened led to another terrifying discovery. A creaking door led to a broken window, which revealed a shadow in the glass. I started to wonder if this was all just a dream, but the pain in my body told me otherwise. Suddenly, I felt myself falling, and then everything went black. I woke up in the hospital, feeling confused and disoriented. My head was spinning, and I was thirsty and hungry. A nurse named Sandy came over to my bed and asked how I was feeling. She took my blood pressure, temperature, and attached a bag of saline to me. I asked for water, but she said I couldn't eat or drink until I was seen by a speech therapist in 2 days. As I closed my eyes to rest, I was awakened by a hissing sound somewhere in the ward. It sounded like a gas leak. I got off my bed and motioned towards the source of the noise. The sound got louder as I got closer, but I didn't find the source. Instead, I found yellow imprints on the floor. I felt like going back to bed because curiosity killed the cat, but a voice in my head beckoned me to follow the imprints as it could save my life. With a grit of my teeth, I followed the imprints. As I walked, I could hear the sound of my foot rubbing against the floor. The further I walked, the faster my heart pumped. After a while, I reached a door, and the imprints were leading inside. As I was deciding whether to proceed inside, the door opened, and I reluctantly went through it. Inside, I found more imprints on the floor. The door behind me was gone, and I had no choice but to proceed on. After a few minutes, I found another door. There was no way to turn back, so I continued forward. As I entered the door, my heart froze, and I saw 2 shadows in the room. I took a closer look, and thank God, there were 2 nurses in the room. With a sigh of relief, I approached the nurses. However, they looked surprised and asked why I was there. They said I should be in bed, and both nurses sounded nervous. I found out one was called Min and the other Dimples. Together we formed a team of 3 and moved across the room and found another door. We opened the door and went through it, only to find a narrow corridor with imprints on the floor. Pressing forward, we walked and walked and walked. 10 minutes became 20, 30, 40, an hour, 2, 3. It felt like it was never ending. Finally, we came to a ledge dividing the corridor. There was no end to the corridor, and Min and Dimples looked at me with worried faces. I suggested pressing forward, and Dimples was with me, but Min rebuffed us, saying that there was no end to this corridor, and we should head back. The 3 of us argued, and finally, Dimples convinced Min to press on. I asked to wait while they moved on, but after waiting for some time, I became worried. Time passed, and I felt more and more anxious. I wondered if I should turn back. Minutes turned into hours, and it felt like an eternity. I decided to turn back, and surprisingly, when I got through the door I came from, the path seemed to open up. There was a way back to where I came from. I became more and more reluctant as I made my way back to the starting point. I felt that I should go back to get Min and Dimples. I finally decided to run back towards the narrow corridor and enter the door located at the end. Thump, thump, thump sounded as my foot hit the floor as I ran. My heart was racing as I stepped into the room, the door creaking ominously as it swung open. But what I saw inside made me want to scream and run away. Lying on the floor were the charred corpses of Min and Dimples, their bodies contorted in agony. The sight made me sick to my stomach, and I had to look away. But my eyes were drawn back to the altar in the center of the room, where a tablet lay. As I approached it, my heart pounding in my chest, I saw my name etched on its surface. I couldn't resist reaching out to touch it, and as I did, the tablet shattered into a million pieces. Suddenly, the room seemed to lose all its color and warmth, becoming gray and cold. I thought it was the end for me, but then a passage opened up behind the altar, beckoning me forward. I stepped into the passage, and as I did, the imprint on the floor lit up with a double line. I followed it, pressing forward until I came to another door. But this one had no knobs or handle, and I couldn't figure out how to open it. That's when I noticed a small carving on the wall to the left of the door. Click, click, click. I turned it clockwise, and with a thud, the door opened. Inside, I found myself in a circular room with another tablet on an altar in the center. As I approached it, a door opened in the opposite direction, and I went through it. But as soon as I did, the door snapped shut behind me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. That's when I heard rustling behind me and turned around to see a figure in dark robes. The strange thing was that there was no wind, but the robes were moving, as if someone were wearing them. My mind screamed at me to run, and I did, sprinting down the corridor as fast as I could. But the figure in the dark robes was chasing me, and I had never seen someone move so quickly. I was almost caught when, at the last minute, I made a dive for it, landing face first in a water bubble. I had escaped in the nick of time, and the dark figure did not come into the water bubble with me. But I knew I couldn't stay there forever, so I swam and swam until I was almost out of breath. Finally, I emerged from the water and fell onto solid ground. 2 corridors appeared in front of me, and I walked toward the end of one of them, panting and sweating. But there was nothing there, nothing at all. I retraced my steps 5 times before noticing something on the lower end of the wall, 5 black buttons. A voice in my head told me to press them from left to right in sequence, so I did. And then, poof, smoke and light blinded me, and I started coughing. When I woke up, I was in my bed in the hospital again. Days later, the doctor told me I was well enough to be discharged. I had survived the horrors of that room, but I knew that I would never forget what I had seen and experienced. After being discharged from the hospital, I decided to explore the sealed-off apartment again. I was determined to uncover the truth behind the rumors surrounding this place. It was evening when I reached the sealed-off apartment. As I entered the apartment, There was a long corridor with a stairway at the right back corner of the building. There were 4 doors to the left. Without hesitation, I entered door number 1 on the left. The room was cold, dark, and had an eerie feel about it. There was no breeze, but I still felt a shiver down my spine. At a corner of the room stood a ragged robed figure. Upon close examination, you could see that it was not human. It had claws instead of hands, and that hollow gaze sent shivers down the spine of whoever gazed upon it. As I breathed, mist came out of my mouth. As the hollow gaze set its sight on me, a low rasp could be heard. "Hungry. Feed me. Feed me." Then out of the blue, it came at me with incredible speed. A few steps, and it was upon me. I hastily turned and ran as fast as I could. As I reached the door to the hallway, it caught up with me. Its outstretched claws struck me on my back. I felt my shirt and skin hot torn. I felt the shirt behind my back got wet. As it was going to hit me a second time, I managed to run out the door. A thud sound can be heard from behind. The figure or monster was on the floor, its leg broken. I ran back into the room, and as I was nearing the monster, I jumped up high and landed both feet on the back of the monster's head. A crack followed by a swoosh. The monster's skull cracked, and what looked like brain matter flowed out of the monster's skull. I found a clue on the monster. Nothing else was in the room. The clue said sacrificial rite. I then decided to check the second room on the left. This was a room full of mirrors. Nothing out of the ordinary upon first look, but on closer observation, you could see what looked like a girl wandering across the mirrors. The girl was writing something on the mirror. "Please save me." Then you saw the girl being shredded into pieces. Nothing else to do here but to leave. The third door on the left was a fully furnished room with a bed in the center. There were restraints on the bedpost, bloodstains on the bedsheet, signs of struggle, and torn dresses on the floor. I found another clue saying revenge on the world. I then proceeded to the last door on the left. Opening the door, a gush of hot air rushed towards me. Sweat poured out of my forehead, and I could not take another step forward. Looking in, I only saw a bottomless pit with heat searing from it. Nothing else could be seen in this room, and it reeked of the smell of danger. As I exit the room outside, I fell to the ground, feeling as if my weight had increased 10 times. I couldn't get up and passed out. As I slowly regained consciousness, I realized that I was no longer inside the apartment. Instead, I was lying on the ground outside the building. I struggled to stand up and began to limp towards the gate. As I approached, I noticed a man standing at a distance, staring intently at me. Something about his gaze made me feel uneasy, but for some reason, I felt compelled to approach him. "Excuse me, sir," I said, my voice hoarse. "Do you know what happened in that building?" The man looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice low and ominous. "That building belonged to one of the richest families in the city. They used it for their dark rituals, sacrificing innocent lives to appease their twisted desires." My blood ran cold at his words. "What kind of rituals?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man's eyes grew dark as he spoke. "They worshipped an ancient deity, one that demanded blood sacrifices in exchange for power and wealth. They believed that by offering up the lives of the innocent, they could gain favor with this being and gain control over their own destinies." I shuddered at the thought of the horrors that must have taken place inside that building. "What happened to them?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man looked at me gravely. "Their greed and depravity finally caught up with them," he said. "One night, something went wrong during one of their rituals, and a fire broke out. They were all trapped inside, and none of them made it out alive." I stood there in shock, trying to process the enormity of what he had just told me. The thought that such evil could exist in the world was almost too much to bear. But as I turned to leave, a nagging thought tugged at the back of my mind. What if there were other buildings, other families, practicing these same twisted rituals in secret? And what if they were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again?